The pen hit the paper before I could stop them. The sound of my father's signature echoed in the lawyer's office like a judge's gavel sealing my fate. "Wait!" I shouted, pushing away from the wall where I'd been frozen. "That's my land too." My father didn't even look up from the contract. My mother crossed her arms and turned her face away from me, her expression carved from stone. "You forfeited it when you left, Tessa," she said coldly. I stared at the contract spread across Mr. Danton's desk. My name was there in the property records, but someone had crossed it out with thick black ink. Like I'd never existed. Like I'd never spent summers working that land beside my grandfather. The lawyer, uncomfortable with the tension, slid a copy of the sale documents toward me. His voice was apologetic but firm. "The sale is final, Ms. Ward." "I'm sorry." My hands trembled as I picked up the paper. And then I saw it, the buyer's name printed at the bottom in bold letters. Leo Ward. The same last name as mine. My name is Tessa Ward, and that was the moment I realized my family would rather sell our legacy than share it with me. The air outside the law office felt heavy and suffocating. Summer heat pressed down on the small Kentucky town where I'd grown up. Where my grandfather had built a life from nothing but hard work and hope. "Why would you do that?" I managed to choke out, following my parents to their car. "Why didn't you even tell me you were selling?" Father turned, his face hard as granite. "Because you chose your job over family, Tessa. You made your choice 8 years ago." Mother added without meeting my eyes, "Eric stayed. He worked the land. He earned his share. You didn't." My brother Eric leaned against the driver's side of his truck, smirking. He jingled his keys mockingly. "Enjoy your city life, Tess. Guess the land's too dirty for your fancy career now, huh?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that leaving for college and building a career didn't mean I'd stopped caring. That I'd sent money home. That I'd called every week. That I'd offered to help manage the property remotely. But the words wouldn't come. They'd already decided who I was in their story, the ungrateful daughter who'd abandoned them. They drove away without looking back. It was the land that had raised me, those 80 acres of rolling hills and wild clover fields. The red barn where I'd spent childhood summers. The creek where my grandfather taught me to skip stones and identify bird calls. I could still see his weathered hands in the soil, planting rows of corn with mathematical precision. "The earth keeps secrets, Tess," he used to say, his voice gravelly but warm. "It remembers who cared for it and who just took from it." After he died when I was 19, I'd left for university. Everyone understood. Even Grandpa had insisted I go, had helped me fill out scholarship applications at the kitchen table. "You've got a sharp mind, girl," he'd said. "Don't waste it. Go see what you can become." I'd promised to return. To help manage the family land. To honor his legacy. But my family had decided that leaving was betrayal. That pursuing my education meant I'd rejected them. No matter how many times I explained, no matter how often I came home for visits, they'd rewritten our history. And now they'd sold the only piece of him I had left. 3 weeks after the sale, I called Mr. Danton again. My apartment in Louisville felt suffocating, filled with memories I couldn't process. "I need to know who bought it," I said. "Please. Just tell me who Leo Ward is." He hesitated. I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I can't reveal specific client details, Ms. Ward. Attorney-client privilege." "Is he local?" I pressed, desperation creeping into my voice. "Is he family? How does he know about the property?" The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, quietly, "Let's just say, the buyer knew your grandfather very well. That's all I can tell you." "What does that mean?" "I've already said too much." "I'm sorry, Tessa. I truly am." The line went dead. I sat staring at my phone, my mind racing. Who was Leo Ward? Why did he have our last name? And why would my parents sell to a stranger, or was he a stranger, without even telling me the property was on the market. Nothing made sense. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: my family was hiding something. And I was going to find out what. 2 weeks later, my mother called. "We're having a family dinner Sunday," she said, her voice stiff and formal. "To talk things out. To move past this unpleasantness." The tone felt wrong immediately. Too careful. Too planned. My mother had never been good at hiding her emotions. She was either warm or cold, never this calculated neutral. Sunday arrived with dark clouds threatening rain. I drove the hour from Louisville back to my hometown, my stomach churning with anxiety. Eric was already there when I arrived, pouring himself a generous glass of wine at the dining room table. Our mother's good china was set out, another warning sign. We only used the good dishes for important occasions. "You mad about the sale?" Eric asked with false casualness, not looking up from his glass. I glared at him. "It wasn't yours to sell, Eric. Grandpa left that land to all of us." Father cut in sharply. "It was survival, Tessa. The taxes were killing us. You never offered to help with any of it." My voice came out barely a whisper. "You never asked." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. After an uncomfortable dinner where we all pretended to eat, Eric suddenly stood and walked to the kitchen. He returned with an envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. "Your share," he said with a shrug. I unfolded the check inside with trembling fingers. The amount made my breath catch, barely enough to cover 2 months' rent on my modest apartment. Maybe $5,000 total. "Market value," Eric said, taking another sip of wine. My hand shook. That land was worth 10 times this. At minimum. 80 acres with water access and that barn Grandpa restored? This is insulting. Mother's voice was ice. "Then consider the rest payment for your attitude. For all the years you weren't here. I was building a career." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly. "I was doing exactly what Grandpa wanted me to do." "He wanted you here," Father said quietly. "He died wanting you here." The accusation hit like a physical blow. I grabbed my purse and left without another word, tears blurring my vision as I drove away. In my rearview mirror, I saw Eric watching from the window, that same smirk still on his face. I couldn't help myself. On the way out of town, I drove past the property, the land that had been my sanctuary, my history, my connection to the grandfather who'd understood me better than anyone. Dusk was falling, painting everything in shades of purple and gold. The fields were already fenced off with new wire, and a large "No Trespassing" sign had been nailed to the gate where Grandpa used to welcome neighbors. I parked and walked to the wooden fence post. My fingers traced the grain where, 20 years ago, my grandfather had carved our initials with his pocket knife. T.W., Tessa Ward. Someone had repainted the post recently. White paint covered most of the old wood. But if I looked carefully, tilting my head to catch the fading light, I could still see the faint outline of those letters beneath the new coat. T.W. Someone had tried to erase me from this place. But like Grandpa always said, the earth remembered. The wood remembered. I remembered. A truck engine rumbled in the distance, and I hurried back to my car, not wanting to be caught trespassing on land that should have been mine. The next morning, I stopped at Millie's Diner, the same place where Grandpa used to take me for chocolate chip pancakes every Saturday. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and the smell of coffee and bacon wrapped around me like a memory. I slid into a booth by the window, ordering coffee I didn't really want. I just needed to be somewhere familiar, somewhere that still felt like home. 2 older women sat in the booth behind me, their voices carrying clearly in the quiet morning. "They say the new owner's already restoring the place," one said. "Hired the Kowalski crew. Local builders, thank goodness." "The one with the same last name as them Weirds," the other replied. "Must be some distant cousin nobody knew about." My heart stopped. I turned around in my seat. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" They looked at me, startled. The first woman adjusted her glasses. About the Ward property? The new owner? You're a Ward too, aren't you? The second woman said, squinting at me. You're Thomas's granddaughter. The one who went to college. Yes, I managed. Did you say the new owner has our last name? They exchanged glances. That's what we heard. Leo Ward. Nobody in town knows where he came from, though. I drove straight to my parents' house, not bothering to call first. My mother answered the door in her gardening gloves, surprise flickering across her face before it hardened into that familiar disapproving mask. Who is Leo Ward? I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Mother stiffened visibly. Behind her, I could see my father look up from his newspaper, his expression wary. Why does it matter? The sale is done. Because he has our name. My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. Because you sold family land to someone with our family name, and nobody thought to mention that to me? Eric appeared at the top of the stairs, his voice carrying that nervous edge that always meant he was hiding something. Distant relative, maybe? There's lots of Wards around here. But I saw it, the flicker of panic in his eyes. The way his hand gripped the banister just a little too tightly. The glance he shot toward our father. They knew exactly who Leo Ward was. And they were terrified I was about to find out. I want answers, I said quietly. And I'm not leaving until I get them. Father folded his newspaper with exaggerated care. You'd better leave, Tessa. Before you make this worse. Worse for who? I asked. But they just stared at me until I left. That night, I couldn't sleep. Questions churned through my mind relentlessly. Finally, at 2 a.m, I drove back to my parents' house. They were asleep, I could see the darkened windows. But I wasn't going to the main house. I went to the detached garage where Grandpa's things were stored. Things they'd never bothered to go through, never bothered to distribute among family. Just boxes gathering dust, full of a life they wanted to forget. Using the key I'd kept from childhood, I let myself in. My phone's flashlight illuminated stacks of cardboard boxes, old furniture, tools hung neatly on walls. I found what I was looking for in the back corner, Grandpa's old cedar chest. The one he'd kept beside his bed, filled with important papers and memories. Inside, I found letters, photographs, deed documents. And at the very bottom, one unopened envelope with my name on it in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting, for Tessa. My hand shook as I opened it. The paper inside was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the words were clear. If you're reading this, the land story isn't over. Trust the name Ward, but not all of them. The next morning, a truck pulled into my apartment complex parking lot. I watched from my window as a tall man stepped out, wearing dusty work boots and faded jeans. He looked to be in his mid-50s, with silver threading through dark hair. He checked a piece of paper in his hand, then looked up at my building. My heart pounded as he walked toward my door. The knock came firm and confident. I opened it with my phone in my hand, ready to call for help if needed. Are you Tessa Ward? He asked. His voice was deep but gentle. Kind eyes that seemed somehow familiar, studied my face. Yes, I managed. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting my answer. I'm Leo Ward. I think we need to talk. I've been trying to work up the courage to contact you for weeks. You're the one who bought the land. I am. He gestured toward the parking lot. There's a diner down the street. Could I buy you coffee? I promise I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to explain. Something in his tone, in his expression, made me trust him. Or maybe I was just desperate for answers. Either way, I grabbed my jacket and followed him to his truck. We sat in the same booth where I'd overheard those women talking days before. Leo ordered coffee, black. I ordered the same, though my stomach was too knotted to actually drink it. I'm your grandfather's son, Leo said without preamble. Thomas Ward had me before he met your grandmother. I was raised by my mother in Tennessee. He sent money, visited when he could, but we kept it quiet. Those were different times. I blinked, trying to process his words. That's impossible. Grandpa never mentioned. Leo pulled out a faded photograph from his wallet. It showed my grandfather as a young man, maybe 25, holding a baby with startling green eyes, the same green eyes I remembered from my childhood. I found out about the sale through Mr. Danton, Leo continued. He's been helping me understand my father's life. When he told me your parents were selling the land cheap, too cheap, I knew something was wrong. So I bought it. Why? My voice cracked. Why would you want it? Because it was his dream, Leo said simply. And because Mr. Danton told me it was yours too. He said you were the one who actually cared about preserving it, about honoring what Thomas built. Leo explained everything over the next hour. How my grandfather had maintained contact throughout his life. How he'd left Leo a letter before he died, explaining his regrets about not being able to acknowledge him publicly. He talked about you constantly in his letters, Leo said with a sad smile. His brilliant granddaughter who was going to change the world. He was so proud when you got into university. Tears stung my eyes. They told me he died disappointed in me for leaving. That's a lie, Leo said firmly. He died hoping you'd finish your education and come back to help preserve what he built. He wanted you to have choices he never did. Then Leo leaned forward, his voice dropping. But there's something else. Your parents sold the land to me for a fraction of its value. At first, I thought it was generosity toward a long-lost relative. But I did some digging. They wanted to bury something, Tessa. And I think we need to find out what. He pulled out a folder from his bag. Inside were documents, surveys, and, most damning, a letter of intent between my father and a commercial development company. They weren't trying to save the farm, Leo said quietly. They were trying to cash out before anyone realized what they were doing. My world tilted sideways as understanding crashed over me. Help me restore it, Leo said, sliding a handwritten contract across the table. I want to honor what your grandfather built. But I can't do it alone. The land should belong to someone who loves it. I read the simple agreement, 50-50 partnership. Equal say in all decisions. Equal share of any profits if we ever chose to sell, though the contract included a clause that neither party could sell without the other's consent. They'll hate this, I whispered, thinking of my parents' faces. Of Eric's smirk. Of all the years they'd made me feel worthless and unwanted. Leo's smile was sharp. Good. That means we're doing something right. I signed my name next to his. Tessa Ward and Leo Ward, two names that should have been on that deed from the beginning. That weekend, we met at the property. The Kowalski crew had already started repairs on the barn. Leo had a contractor's eye, pointing out what needed immediate attention versus what could wait. We should clear out the barn first, he suggested. See what your grandfather left behind. In the dim interior, beneath years of accumulated dust and forgotten equipment, I found a box marked Important Papers, Thomas Ward. My heart raced as I opened it. Inside were tax documents going back 20 years, receipts, and correspondence. And buried at the bottom, falsified records with my father's signature, showing unpaid taxes and debts that had never actually existed. They created a paper trail, Leo said grimly, examining the documents. Made it look like the property was failing financially so they could justify selling it cheap. Probably so they could claim it was a mercy sale if anyone asked questions. I found more evidence as we dug deeper. Emails between my father and Eric discussing a shopping complex. A developer who was willing to pay triple the property's worth once they secured enough surrounding land. My family hadn't been trying to preserve anything. They'd been trying to profit while making me look like the villain who'd abandoned them. We need to expose this, I said, anger replacing the hurt in my chest. They can't get away with this. Leo nodded. But we need more than documents. We need them to admit it on record. That's when I remembered Eric's pride. His need to brag about his schemes. I have an idea, I said. 3 days later, I texted Eric asking to meet for coffee. I told him I wanted to apologize, to make peace. He agreed immediately, probably thrilled at the chance to gloat. We met at a cafe in town. Leo sat 3 tables away, his phone recording everything. Eric never noticed him. I was too harsh, I said, playing my role. I understand why you had to sell. Eric's guard dropped. He leaned back, that familiar smirk appearing. Dad's gonna make a killing once that shopping complex gets approved. The developer's already drawn up plans. Leo appeared beside our table. Shopping complex? He asked casually. That's interesting. I'm the new owner, by the way. Leo Ward. Eric's face drained of all color. Who are you again? Your father's worst nightmare, Leo replied calmly. And we have everything we need. That night, Leo and I reviewed the recording. Eric's voice, clear and proud, admitting the entire scheme. The development deal. The falsified financial records. The plan to profit from the shopping complex. We send this to the town zoning board, Leo said. Anonymously at first. Let them start asking questions. And then? Then we wait for your family to panic. Within 3 days, the development proposal was frozen pending investigation. Someone had submitted evidence of potential fraud in the property sale. The zoning board launched a formal inquiry. My father called at 11 at night, his voice shaking with rage. What did you do? I kept my voice steady and cold. I protected what's left of Grandpa's dream. Something you clearly never cared about. You have no idea what you've done. We could lose everything. You already took everything from me, I replied. At least now we're even. I hung up and blocked his number. For the first time in years, I felt something other than guilt or shame about my family. I felt powerful. They showed up at the farm 2 days later, all 3 of them. My mother's eyes were red from crying. My father's face was hard with barely contained fury. Eric looked scared, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Why are you doing this to us? Mother demanded, her voice breaking. We're your family. I didn't do anything, I said quietly. You did this to yourselves when you decided to steal from your own daughter and destroy your father's legacy. Father turned his glare on Leo, who stood beside me with his arms crossed. You're not family. You have no right to be here. Leo's voice was calm but firm. Neither are people who betray their own blood for profit. Thomas Ward was my father too. And unlike you, I actually want to honor what he built. You're nobody, Eric spat. Some bastard child nobody knew about. You don't get to lecture us about family. No, I interrupted. But I do. And I'm done pretending you're anything other than what you are, greedy, selfish people who only care about money. Mother reached for me, tears streaming down her face. Please, Tessa. Don't do this. I stepped back. I already did. The town meeting about the development proposal happened 3 weeks later. The community center was packed, everyone wanted to hear about the scandal that had rocked our small town. Families who'd known mine for generations filled the rows of chairs, whispering and staring. My father stood at the front, dressed in his Sunday best, preparing to defend his plan. He talked about progress, about bringing jobs to the community, about modernization. Then Leo stood up. Before we vote on anything, I think everyone should hear this. He played the recording. Eric's voice echoed through the community center, clear and damning. Dad's gonna make a killing once that shopping complex gets approved. The developer's already drawn up plans. Then came Eric's laugh, his casual admission about the falsified financial records. About how they'd manipulated the sale to maximize their profit while cutting me out entirely. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who'd known my family for decades stared in shock. Mrs. Kowalski, whose husband was doing our renovation work, shook her head in disgust. For the first time in my life, I watched my father's face go pale with shame. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but people were already standing up and walking out. The vote wasn't even close. The development was rejected unanimously. The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days, Eric's real estate company lost 3 major clients. People in town stopped doing business with him. His phone went silent as former friends and associates distanced themselves from the scandal. My mother stopped showing her face at church, at the grocery store, anywhere she might encounter the people who'd once respected her. The shame was too much to bear. My father left increasingly angry voicemails on my phone, which I never answered. "You'll regret this, Tessa. You've destroyed this family. Your grandfather would be ashamed of you." But I didn't feel regret. I felt quiet relief. For the first time in 8 years, I didn't carry the weight of their disappointment. They'd created this situation. They'd chosen greed over integrity. All I'd done was refuse to let them profit from their betrayal. Late one night, Leo and I sat on the porch of the old farmhouse, watching fireflies dance in the darkness. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," he said quietly. Standing up to them took real courage. "I just did what was right." That's exactly what he would have said. Over the following months, Leo and I worked to restore the property. We repaired the farmhouse's sagging porch, replaced broken windows, and repainted the barn in its original red. Local craftsmen helped us rebuild what time and neglect had damaged. We planted flowers my grandmother had once loved, roses along the fence line, wildflowers in the front yard. The Kowalski crew worked carefully, preserving original features while making necessary updates. I felt my grandfather's presence everywhere. In the creak of the barn door he'd hung 40 years ago. In the worn floorboards of the farmhouse where he'd walked thousands of times. In the wind through the clover fields he'd planted with his own hands. For the first time since his death, the land felt alive again. Not as a commodity to be sold or developed, but as a living legacy, exactly what he'd intended. One afternoon, while Leo and I were clearing the back field, I found the old stone marker where Grandpa used to sit and watch the sunset. I sat there myself, tears streaming down my face, feeling closer to him than I had in years. "Thank you," I whispered to the wind. "Thank you for Leo. Thank you for the truth. Thank you for trusting me with this." The land seemed to answer with a gentle breeze that smelled like summer and possibilities. 6 months after the town meeting, Mr. Danton called me. His voice was excited in a way I'd never heard from the usually reserved lawyer. "Tessa, you need to come to my office. Immediately. I've found something." Leo and I drove to town together, speculation running wild about what the lawyer had discovered. Had my parents tried something else? Had Eric filed some kind of lawsuit? Mr. Danton met us at the door, holding a thick folder of documents. "Your grandfather left an amended will years ago," he explained, leading us to his conference room. It was filed separately from his main will, kept in a safety deposit box I didn't know about until last week when the bank contacted me about unpaid box fees. He spread papers across the table. Legal documents, all bearing my grandfather's signature and notarized stamps. "It names both you and Leo as co-heirs of the Ward estate," Mr. Danton continued, his voice grave. "Retroactive to the date of his death. The original will divided everything between his children, your father and Leo equally. But this amendment specifically protects your inheritance share, Tessa. It states clearly that any sale of the property requires your written consent." I couldn't breathe. "What does that mean?" "It means the sale was invalid from the beginning," Mr. Danton said quietly. "Your parents had no legal right to sell your portion without your agreement." The will was read formally in Mr. Danton's office 3 days later. My parents sat across from me in stunned silence as the lawyer explained that the sale of my share had been fraudulent. That Grandpa had specifically protected my inheritance, knowing exactly what might happen after his death. "This amended will supersedes all previous documents," Mr. Danton read. "Thomas Ward was of sound mind when he executed these changes, as verified by 2 independent doctors. The signatures are witnessed and notarized. This is legally binding. Every eye in the room turned to me. My mother's face was pale. My father stared at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Eric's voice came out small and desperate. "You're kidding. This is a joke." I looked at him directly for the first time in months. "Grandpa never joked about family, Eric. You know that." Mr. Danton continued reading the specific provisions. Grandpa had anticipated everything: the possibility of being pressured to sell, the risk of my being cut out unfairly, the importance of preserving the land for future generations. He'd even included a personal note: "To my granddaughter Tessa, who has the courage to build her own life while honoring where she came from. This land is yours by right of love and labor. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Tears streamed down my face as his words echoed in the silent office. The court proceedings took 6 weeks. My parents tried to fight, hiring expensive lawyers who argued about technicalities and statute of limitations. But the evidence was overwhelming. Grandpa's amended will was legitimate, notarized, and filed properly. The judge ruled in my favor, voiding the original sale and reinstating my ownership. More devastating for my parents, the court ordered them to repay all money they'd received from the fraudulent transaction, both from the sale to Leo and from the developer who'd been planning the shopping complex. My parents' assets were seized to satisfy the judgment. Their house went into foreclosure. Eric's business collapsed entirely under the weight of debt and destroyed reputation. They were left with almost nothing, certainly not the land they'd tried so hard to steal. I sat in the courtroom as the verdict was read, feeling neither triumph nor revenge. Just a deep, aching sadness for what we'd all lost. Not property or money, but the possibility of being a real family. Of honoring Grandpa's memory together instead of fighting over his legacy like vultures over a carcass. Leo squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," he whispered. I nodded, but the weight of it all pressed down on my chest. Winning felt hollow when it meant losing what remained of my family forever. I visited my parents one last time before they moved out of their house. The rooms were empty of furniture, bare walls showing where pictures had hung for decades. My childhood home looked like a skeleton, stripped of everything that had once made it alive. Mother's eyes were hollow as she let me in. Father sat in the one remaining chair in the living room, staring at nothing. Eric had already left town, moved to Florida to escape the scandal, I'd heard. "I didn't do this to destroy you," I said softly, my voice echoing in the empty space. "I did it to honor him. To honor what Grandpa built and believed in." They didn't reply. What could they say? That they were sorry? That they'd been wrong? Neither of them had ever been good at admitting mistakes. I set an envelope on the floor near my mother's feet. Inside was a check, enough to help them start over somewhere else. Not a fortune, but enough to live on while they figured out what came next. "Grandpa taught me that family means taking care of each other," I said. "Even when they don't deserve it." As I walked toward the door, my mother's voice stopped me. It was barely a whisper, broken and raw. "She's just like him," she said. "Stubborn and righteous and impossible to defeat." I didn't know if it was meant as a compliment or a curse. I chose to take it as the former. 1 year after Leo first knocked on my apartment door, we stood together on the restored farmland, watching as families gathered for the grand opening. Children ran through the tall grass, laughing and chasing each other. The red barn had been converted into a community space for local events and farmers' markets. A new sign stood at the entrance, carved from oak by a local artisan, "Ward Family Preserve, in memory of Thomas Ward." The local newspaper had covered our restoration efforts, turning our story from scandal into inspiration. People came from surrounding towns to see what we'd built, not a shopping complex or commercial development, but a protected space where families could connect with the land my grandfather had loved. I stood beside Leo, both of us smiling as the mayor gave a speech about community values and preserving agricultural heritage. Mrs. Kowalski waved at us from the crowd. Mr. Danton stood in the back, looking proud. "Grandpa always said the earth remembers who cared for it," I whispered to Leo. He nodded, his eyes scanning the golden field swaying in the summer breeze. And now it remembers you. Both of us. The way it should have from the beginning. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace. Not revenge or victory, but the quiet satisfaction of honoring a promise. The land was home again. And so was I.